An observation I've made about think of the children is the more often someone says think of the children, the more often that's a catchphrase to guilt trip you into supporting a position where the children aren't thought of and probably would be heavily endangered under the morality being used to sell the position to you. It's used more as a shaming tactic to swindle you into accepting the moral base points as factual when they're actually false, instead of an actual child-related caretaking argument. A children caretaking-related example would be child support and paternity fraud. Every so often there are arguments about whether someone found to have committed paternity fraud should be paid child support, and there are frequent cases where someone paying child support when it was revealed paternity fraud was committed are continued to be required to pay, as opposed to having the defrauded money repaid to them. The narrative to support this is usually, it's about the child. It's about what's best for the child. Think of the children. Think of the children. Such arguments prey on people being uninformed. You're supposed to accept the statement, it's for the child, at face value and not scrutinize it at all. You're just supposed to accept it's for the child as true, factual, actually the best thing for the child, and therefore, after you've accepted that it's what's best for the child, it's supposed to sound like a more reasonable argument, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. But suppose we scrutinized whether or not it's for the child actually was for the child, and did so with some actual medical knowledge. You might notice that in order to commit paternity fraud, some degree of child endangerment is a biological prerequisite. Falsifying someone's biodata can kill them. Suppose, for example, the father's blood type is A positive, and the false father that thinks he's the father is B positive, and the B positive father assumes it's safe to give the child B positive blood, in the case of emergency, when they live in an area that has a blood drought, such as California, where O blood may take more time to obtain and the child needs a transfusion and receives B positive blood. The child's probably going to die. If I were a doctor, and I changed a child's blood type records from A positive to B positive, and that resulted in the child's death, at best I'd be guilty of malpractice. I could be guilty of criminally negligent manslaughter or even premeditated murder, depending on where I was in the exact circumstances. But all three of those are supposed to be okay with the catchphrase, think of the children. In order to even be having the discussion about if a person that's been victimized by paternity fraud should continue to pay child support, we've already established the person being paid the child support has committed child endangerment. At that point, we should really be asking if the child should actually be in the custody of someone that's placed the child's life at risk, and if the child should be confiscated, considering the endangerment committed by the custodian. Talking about how much we should pay the child-endangering custodian is not the direction things should be going in. And some people will argue, well, maybe you'll get lucky and the blood types maybe won't have a discrepancy with paternity fraud, so maybe, if you're very uninformed about biology, you'll accept an argument about how the fraud was necessary in order to solicit financial support to benefit the child. To that I have 3 points. A. Either they're trying to take advantage of people not knowing enough about blood types and biodata forgery to understand how dangerous that is, or the fact that a blood type discrepancy is the statistically probable result, along with the corresponding life-threatening risks, or they themselves do not know. B. If this was a male committing maternity fraud in a region with poor bookkeeping by taking the child to a doctor after the child's birth, and falsifying biodata to argue the mother was not the real mother of the child, and forcefully extracting money from a woman due to this act of fraud, would most supporters be equally as sympathetic to this case of maternity fraud as with paternity fraud? The answer to that is probably not. And C, even if point B was yes, it wouldn't matter, because paying for paternity fraud is funding the child's well-being by giving custody of the child and the support resources to a criminal guilty of child endangerment, when it's at least plausible the other involved parties won't have records of being child endangerment criminals, and may be willing to take custody of the child, or arrange for the child to be given to a guardian or sent to a family willing to adopt as an alternative to the child-endangering criminal. A lot of people have this desire to throw around catchphrases like, think of the children, or mothers know best, or they find this idea of separating a child from a mother distasteful, and they apply superhuman expectations that it's not possible for a mother to abuse the child, or maim the child, or endanger the child, or kill the child, to justify not having to separate one from another. I understand that's an uncomfortable thing to think about for a lot of people, but that doesn't make it okay to decide buzzwords and catchphrases arguing for giving child custody to criminals get to be magically exempt from scrutiny. Personally, I think a newborn child's biodata should be recorded at birth and placed in their medical profile, since that information can be the difference between life and death. Falsifying that data can kill them, and all too often we hear the occasional news story of a child dying because they've been placed in the custody of someone that's repeatedly been convicted of endangerment or molestation charges or something of the sort, and I have to wonder how many viable parties involved, or candidates for adoption, were available for selection other than the criminal party that was actually awarded custody. Though that's a subject for another video. I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.